welcome everybody. It's been a really long time since we've done one of these, but hopefully it'll all just come back to us and we'll get right back into the groove of things. Today's webinar, the latest in the ongoing community conversation, sponsored by TIES and the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice, is intended to offer a space to brainstorm how those of you on the call can help ensure that your ecosystems are relevant to the design efforts happening in your state. 11 states receive funds from the U.S. Department of Education for rethinking education. And today we have invited several speakers on to offer some background information and then to mostly set the stage for you to engage in conversation with one another about how to ensure that you're best representing the interests of the many and that you and your ecosystem serve. A couple of quick housekeeping things. You are in listen only mode right now. We may stay that way. We may bring you on to answer questions or ask your questions in a little bit. But in the meantime, we would really like you to back channel and participate in the chat, in that chat window. Start off by letting us know who you are, what ecosystem you represent, and go ahead and have side conversations about the things that our speakers are saying. Most importantly, however, you'll see down at the bottom, there's a little Q&A button. Go ahead and click that button when you have a chance, and you will see a place where you can submit questions. If any of our past webinars are an indicator, we will ultimately end up running out of time to answer every single question. So the best possibility of you getting your question answered or discussed is to get it in there early, and also to make sure that even if you don't have a question to ask yourself, that you're reading over the questions that are being posted and voting for the ones that resonate with you. We'll try to target those questions that have the most of those upvotes. This call will be recorded and you'll receive some information on how to view that recording after the call is over. So if you don't mind, I'd like to take a minute here and introduce today's panelists. First, we have Veronica Gonzalez, Director of the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice. Veronica is a true expert about connections and advocacy. This is something I think all of you already know. Next, we have Jeff Weld. Jeff is the Executive Director for the Iowa Governor's STEM Advisory Council. Additionally, Jeff just completed 21 months of national service as STEM education policy consultant for the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and led the production of America's Strategic Plan for STEM Education. Jeff's book, Creating a STEM Culture for Teaching and Learning, informed the national plan by comprehensively examining all aspects of the U.S. STEM movement. We also have with us today Della Cronin. Della is principal of the Bose Public Affairs Group of Washington, D.C. I was just telling her before, I've got my favorite bookstore in Washington, D.C., Kramer Books mug here in honor of her. She's in their D.C. office, and Della brings over 20 years of experience in education and research policy, legislative and regulatory processes, fundraising, and public affairs to the firm, having worked for a broad array of education companies and interests. And last but certainly not least, Jan Morrison. Jan probably needs no introduction to many or all of you, any of you, but just in case you're one of the few who has not yet worked with or talked with Jan, let me briefly try to tell you about her. Jan is the founder of TIES, one of the principal architects of the STEM Learning Ecosystem Community of Practice, and a true international leader in STEM. She's worked on some of the biggest and most exciting design projects in STEM education, including in and out of school. She's working closely right now with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District in Ohio on their plan for school in the fall, and is serving on a team that's helping set Ohio guidelines and recommendations for learning in the fall. I could go on, but you'll see for yourselves shortly what I'm discussing. So to get us started, I'd really like to turn things over to Veronica, who can share with us our intended outcomes for our little session today.
Sure. Thank you so much, Jeremy, and to all the other panelists that have made it on today. We really love seeing everybody's faces and are excited that all of you could join us on fairly short notice. You know, as ecosystem leaders, we really wanted to make sure that everyone is knowledgeable about the solicitation and that your state responded to, aware of the awarded proposal, and prepared to really approach the state as ecosystem leaders in ways that help you execute on the work that was promised. And so we truly believe that STEM ecosystems are invaluable to the districts, the local and regional education agencies, and of course the state. And so TIES has been working very diligently to help the state of Ohio through its processes and deep insights and some tips. And so we're going to run through some of those today. And this will truly be a discussion-based webinar where we can talk to you a little bit about your concerns and questions. We can offer some insights and feedback. But our three outcomes are pretty straightforward. Today, we hope that you will leave knowing about the work that's happening in your state. We want to make sure that you are developing some ideas and strategies for how to best connect to that work and represent your ecosystem within the state. And then also to build some strategies that we can share with others and all of you about the next steps and action plans. So hopefully we walk away with those three outcomes and have a really great discussion today. Thanks again, Jeremy, and I'll turn things back to you.
Thank you, Veronica. And as everybody in the ecosystem knows, if you need to get a question answered or be put in touch with a person, Veronica's the person that you want to reach out to. She knows everybody and what they're into. So keep that in mind if you haven't already had those conversations as you're starting to develop these plans. We'd like to have, if you don't mind, Della, I'm hoping that maybe you could start us off with a little bit of level setting to talk about what it is. What is this grant? How does the discretionary grant work? What are the education models looking like that you've heard of so far? And what does this process look like at this stage?
Okay, sure. That is a tall order. I'm going to start. I'm going to start with sort of an overview of where the inception for this opportunity and where sort of the folks who are developing grant applications and other programs at the Department of Education and other agencies are thinking these funds should go and what they should do. So it's been a crazy year, if you didn't know. And the folks in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill and at the agencies have, of course, been reeling, as everybody has on the line, in dealing with how education looks in this new paradigm, what sort of resources are out there available to help schools struggle to meet the challenges that they're facing. So I suspect everybody knows, because this was part of, this was the starting point for this opportunity, that in March, Congress passed a bill that invested a significant amount in education to help schools and get through the pandemic, at least in the short term. And that's where these funds came from. These funds were part of the CARES Act. And it's pretty clear that the Department of Education had some specific goals around a number of issues, including vouchers and private support for private schools, but also making sure that states were being innovative in what they were thinking about for preparing the workforce for the immediate needs. And that's sort of where this came from in terms of that opportunity. The other things that are happening at the Department of Education that I hope you all know about, if you don't already, is that last week the Education, Innovation, and Research Grant solicitation came out from the department for the early phase part of that program. And that also has a STEM and computer science absolute priority, which hopefully some of you know about and maybe can take advantage of. And then one other thing that I'll add, and then I think someone else is actually going to walk through the details of the grant solicitation and the results for you. But I think that one of the reasons I was asked to talk today is because I think advocacy is an element of being successful in implementing these grants and making relationships at the state and local level that are going to be really important, not only for capitalizing on this opportunity, but for continuing the work that you're all doing. I think that we've talked about, if you've been on other calls where we've talked about things that have been happening in Washington, D.C., I think we've really tried to emphasize the importance of building relationships at the state and local level with the folks who are making decisions around Title IV Part A funds or other sort of discretionary funds that can be available to support your work. And that's becoming even more true as we see opportunities like this one come through. So as part of the tools that I hope that you'll get after the call today, there's been an advocacy toolkit developed that gives you pointers on who to connect with locally, how to do that, and hopefully connect with like-minded folks in your states to create better STEM opportunities for students.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm sure folks will have more specific questions for you as we go on and as the conversation evolves. And I think Jan is going to spend a couple minutes now talking about really the nuts and bolts of the solicitation and what it means for all of us. Jan, this isn't your first rodeo with things like this. What can you share from all of that experience to help us make sure that we're making the largest impact possible?
Well, I think first of all, I think it's really critical. Thanks, Jeremy. And also, let me stop. And Della, it's always great. We always count on you for direction, not only the information, but the direction that you provide. So it's really important for us all to be part, to have the relationship with you. But it's great to see you. Thanks so much. Jeremy, I think what we need to do is to really, now that Della has sort of set the scene, let's go back and actually talk about what this solicitation was intended to do in a more granular nature. It says rethinking K-12 education models. It provides the opportunity to not just use the COVID environment to address the immediate needs, but to set the foundation for a rethink on the state level of how education system, the system itself, is delivering on its promise to all children in its care. And so the compensation is open. The money that was allocated is open to the state educational agencies, and it was very interestingly invited to all 50 states. However, the states were ranked by their COVID load. How bad is bad in your state at the moment that the solicitation was written, not when it was released. And so there was a ranking of them, and you are given certain number of points. So for instance, the state that I live in Ohio, we were put 8 points behind because at that time we didn't have the kind of COVID load that New York did. So that automatically put in some space in the point system. And anything that comes from the government, as everybody is probably aware, comes from a point system that's disclosed at the moment that the solicitation is released. But let's look a little bit at the 3 areas that were the absolute priorities. In other words, your state had to declare one of the 3 that they were going to actually go for as they were writing and making the case for receiving the funds that were going to be available under this particular solicitation. Mind you, again, it's rethinking K-12 education models, REM. So the first one is micro grants for families, and it's access to technology, educational services needed to advance learning. And the interesting thing about this one is that everybody thought everybody would apply for this. And as it turns out, this was not true because lots of this particular part of the grant would have been very difficult to actually actualize on a state system in order to get those families the money. You know, it would go through different processes, and by the time you got down to the families, it would be more difficult. So that's how that was viewed, but that was number 1. Number 2 was an LMS, statewide virtual learning and course access to programs. So you had a whole range of subjects that would not be taught in a traditional or assigned setting. In other words, no broadcasting school. The idea of real learning, real outcomes, and courses and opportunities for kids on screens in which you were talking about a different level of engagement. That seemed to be what everybody anticipated. I was on the original calls with the states, and everybody was pretty jazzed about that one. The third one, new field-initiated models for providing remote education, not yet imagined, to be ensure that every child is learning and prepared to be successful. Driving with learning, not driving with the remote, and remote education. And if you look in the others, you're going to see that remote education is not mentioned in the 2 prior. It is the one that uses that term, and not yet imagined, which was an enormous challenge. And on the call that with the original states, it seemed like this is the one that nobody was going to do. As it turns out, that's quite the opposite. It was the one that everybody got their guns together and figured it out. and decided it was an opportunity for a state to go for things that they had been thinking about in remote education, and defined remote not just as online, but remote could be the community itself, remote from the school building. And that was also something that was discussed and was provided as an opportunity. So here you have the potential of this. This is what the solicitation actually looked like, Jeremy. And this is how everybody sat with their state teams and how they responded. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Jan. I appreciate that. There's a lot for us to really dig through and discuss there as we get into some conversation. But before we do that, I know that there's a component to this, or at least I suspect that there's a component to this that's going to rely really heavy on our advocacy efforts and how we influence decisions at the state level. Veronica, can you talk to us a little bit about what we should be thinking about, who we should be talking to as we're thinking about advocacy in this situation?
Sure, Jeremy, thank you. I think there's still a lot that's sort of up in the air in regards to this question. I've talked to a few ecosystem leaders, and everybody is kind of in different spaces around that. I would definitely, though, think first about, so first and foremost, I should say that we've been having several conversations with the ecosystems around equity and access and what that looks like. And so as folks are scrambling to get things together and talking to folks in their community, one of the things that I've heard over and over again, and I think it's a really great way of doing things, is, as we rebuild the system, not going back to the way that it always was, speak to the people that have been the most marginalized in this. So speaking to families, speaking to nonprofits and community-based organizations that are working in communities to really work with families and students that have really probably always been marginalized, but with COVID, those marginalizations and sort of the disconnection, whether it be actual disconnection to broadband or whether it be, complete disconnection to their community, they can definitely tell you first and foremost some of the things that are really needed there. I think the idea of listening to the greater community is really important when thinking about advocating for the right types of learning environments and new models, and sort of all of the great things that Jan just went over, what that could look like for your state. And so I think part of this is meant to be a discussion, and we're really curious on what all of you sort of in the chat have been doing as well. Really would like to hear from you as we move along in the conversation, what you're planning on doing and having conversations with folks in the community. And, Jan, feel free to add here in terms of advocacy, Della and Jeff, but love to hear more from all of you on the call.
So I think, thanks so much, Veronica. I think what we want to maybe try and handle today is to flow a little bit from the actual moment that a solicitation comes out like this. Where did our ecosystems actually play a role when the state brought people together? I know in the state of Ohio, I had to tap them on the shoulder and remind them that we had ecosystems in order to have that happen. And I think when a solicitation like this shows, the first of all, having the access to it, second of all, having, just as you said, understanding that pathway to the voice at the state level is critical. And I think what we'd like to hear as we go into who was awarded and how this all happened, we would like to hear that, to have those tips from everybody who has been part of this on their state and has made the ecosystem invaluable to the process. How did that happen? And then, and now that the award comes, now what's the next steps? So I think, if that makes some sense, Jeremy.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. So if you're listening right now, if you're participating in this call, and this is something that you have some experience with, you've done some great things in your state of guiding that conversation, of making sure that all voices are heard, try to let us know that in the chat, and maybe we'll go to some of you to share your experiences and the lessons that you've learned. While we're waiting for some of those folks to come in, I wanted to call back a thing Veronica said, just because if you've been on the calls that we had earlier during this experience, or if you go back and watch them, I think something Veronica said you'll hear over and over and over again. And that's that as we've shifted this this conversation to be really heavily focused on equity, what we keep hearing from groups, large groups, small groups, well-represented groups and underrepresented groups, is that people keep saying, nobody actually asked us. Nobody listened to us. Nobody really found out. They just assumed that they knew what we needed. And sometimes they were right and their hearts were in the right place, but a lot of the time they were wrong. So I think that's a really, really important thing to keep hammering home with the groups that you work with, is to make sure that you're listening. So while we're waiting for some of those folks to come in, I'm wondering if maybe Jan, Della, Veronica, if you think it was okay for us to go to maybe one of our ecosystem leaders who are on the call. Jeff, as I mentioned before, was with the Federal Office of Science and Technology before heading back to Iowa. And I'm really curious about what he thinks with that kind of dual perspective about what the role is for an ecosystem and how they can really, really shape this conversation. Jeff?
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. I'm going to tie the two together. Jan, it really resonated with me when you talked about tapping on the shoulder, because I'll give a quick story of how STEM got involved in Iowa's, and I think it's instructive for everybody. Take it for what it's worth. But I first heard that Iowa had received the grant thanks to the STEM Ecosystems Alert, sending us all this chart that's on the screen now. I think that was early this week.
That's my favorite thing that I've heard, by the way. That's great.
So I promptly forwarded that to my governor's office. By the way, the relationship here in Iowa, the STEM ecosystem is a statewide program under the governor's umbrella. We are the Governor's STEM Advisory Council. We also have, of course, the Iowa Department of Education, who authored the proposal. So we're separate entities, but we're strong allies. We dovetail in a lot of ways. We did not dovetail on the proposal generation here, however. That was a surprise to me when I got your email. And so I promptly zipped off a note to the governor's office, simply asking that very question that Jan talked about. Hey, I note that Iowa is a recipient. Congratulations, I think, although that means we're a hotspot with COVID, but we'll take the opportunity. And what can we do was my question to the governor's office. And I'm so grateful that the response was, well, you tell us, what can you and your STEM ecosystem do for the state contributory to this project? So we're in real time today and tomorrow and this week generating a list of ideas. I'll float a few to you all, and you tell me if I'm on the right track. The Iowa proposal, by the way, fits that middle category. The Department of Education is going to establish an Iowa e-learning central platform. And as you can imagine, it's going to be uploaded with coursework and curricula and eventually professional development, learning management system integration capacity. It's coming out in phases already by this month. They expect a phase 1 that uploads core content, coursework, and curriculum in Spanish and English and social studies and computer science and science and mathematics. And then through 2021, the goal is to expand that through K-12 and across the disciplines. Through 21-22, an expansion of the professional development services to support educators and families, by the way. They're very explicit about stating that this is for in and out of school networks. So when I got the invitation to imagine how we might contribute, I've been brainstorming with small groups, and I'll be with my team tomorrow. But my main and first focus, like yours, is keep preserving the STEM momentum in our state. There's a chance here that some of our progress may be retarded as people retreat to trenches and safety and what's worked well historically. And I think our opportunity and the imperative here is to continue to push the envelope, use this opportunity, as Jan cited the title, rethink how we do business in education. So here's where I tie in the federal experience. I think what we'll be bringing to the table as a STEM ecosystem on the governor's office's invitation is first content, as they're uploading coursework, some of which intercepts with STEM education, we've had enormous scaling success with curriculum and ag science education, for example. CASE, Project Lead the Way you're all familiar with, Bootstrap, and a long list of other partners that we in STEM have worked with closely to bring to Iowa. We want to make sure those opportunities are part of the Iowa e-learning central database. I'm gonna avail our team, I hope our team is agreeable to this, to review other people's uploads of curriculum for its STEM alignment. I think here's where the federal STEM plan comes in critically, is if our team has the access and opportunity to review some of the other uploaded content for its STEM alignment. We'll expect to see plenty of project-based learning, and if not, we'll likely point that out to people and help develop that. We'll expect to see plenty of ecosystem reference, a lot of community connection to what is being uploaded, a transdisciplinary thrust to what others might upload. Work-based learning, when and if it's appropriate. I'm hitting the highlights of the federal STEM plan, as you can probably tell, using that and leveraging that as the state creates a rethought educational system to be thinking progressively. I think our team will happily produce and upload independently generated professional development opportunities for educators, online pedagogy best practices, equity and inclusion best practices. We just had a virtual 2-day equity and STEM workshop a few days ago, well received in the state. I gotta believe something like that would be welcomed by the powers that be. And fourth, my final idea, all of this precedes talking with my team, of course, so asterisk everything, is mentor matching. There's reference in the Iowa proposal that there will be a mentoring system established by which individuals and organizations that really have the virtual environment down pat will nurture and mentor those coming. We have a mentoring system in place through the STEM ecosystem that I think we can leverage statewide and expand even beyond the STEM disciplines. And similarly, an online community also referenced in the proposal. We have a well-established online community, much as you do, connecting STEM educators of the state that I think we can leverage at the state level. So my intent is to be, what's that phrase, be at the table or be on the menu. I expect we'll be at the table and we'll be strong contributors thanks to the STEM ecosystem we've established with your help and support. Open to ideas, thoughts, critiques, or questions.
Thanks, Jeff. I was gonna say be in the room where it happens, but now I feel like everyone's tired of Hamilton right now, so I'll maybe take a short break. So there's a question that I'm curious about as well from Carol Moore that I'm gonna throw to you, Della, here. And after we have that, Michael Ward shared some interesting things in the chat that I'm hoping, Michael, that you'd be willing to unmute your mic in a few minutes and talk about what you did. But Della, what Carol's asking is, how do we even find our state's focal area? We want to align with it, we want to shift it, but we don't even know what it is necessarily. So how do we do that? How do we find that?
Yeah, so generally speaking, I'm just going to share what I know about federal grant making generally, and maybe Jan knows something more specific to this solicitation. But successful applications are posted online. So you should be able to go to the Department of Education's website and find at least the abstracts for these successful applications, and to get at least some sense of what they've promised to the department in return for these funds, and connect it to your work. I don't know if Jan has more specific knowledge about where to find the focal areas.
We do. Della, thanks so much. I see maybe if everything in the world works the way it's supposed to, that maybe I can bring it up. I actually got all the proposals.
Of course you did.
Because I thought it was useful not only to have the abstracts, but to have the applications, to have the technical reviews, but also to have everybody's. Because just because they weren't awarded didn't mean that they didn't come up with a fabulous idea or a piece of an idea that some other group could use, or we could use in general. So, so this is how this award information was presented. And we'll make sure everybody gets this.
Jan, is that something, are you pulling something up there, or is it not connecting?
Can you see, you can't see it?
Oh, yes, okay, there it is, I see it.
Okay.
All right. Perfect. Well, thank you. And I think that that's those are really good ideas. And I think a lot of this just comes down to, unfortunately, doing your legwork, figuring out who you know, and starting to have those conversations. I know that in Ohio, and Jan can attest to this. There's also this dichotomy that there probably exists everywhere, where there's both the stated goals and the stated focus areas, and also the kind of super secret focus areas that you need to make sure to include too. So nothing beats having those conversations and starting to use the leverage that you gain by being part of a big international initiative like this to work your way into those conversations. I saw in the chat, and I wanted to allow Michael, if he's willing to talk for a second, because I guess maybe kind of obvious, but I never really thought about using a tool like change.org to start collecting names and getting messages across. So Michael, I'm hoping that maybe you'd be willing to just take a second and talk to us about what your process was and what sorts of impact you've seen from that.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Perfect. So good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are. Good morning or good afternoon. But my name is Michael Ward Jr., and I'm the president and CEO of AUTUMN, which is Austin Urban Technology Movement. And we connect the Black and Hispanic community with the technology industry through job placements, career development, and networking opportunities. We've been around since 2016, and at the start of this year, once COVID hit, we just saw the disparities have been impacting those that are Black and Hispanic, but also those that are just underserved and underrepresented across the board. So given social distancing and moving through us respecting, barriers and staying, at place, we realized that if you do not have access to the internet, well, now you're missing out on information. And if you don't have access to devices, well, now you're being left behind in society. We see it in our schools district now with our children. We see it with adults that have been laid off of jobs that are unable to do any type of remote working. And we realize that a lack of access to the internet or devices is just a barrier. And that overall directly ties into our mission, which our mission is to connect those that are Black and Hispanic with the tech industry overall. So in order for us to really get traction and have more visibility around these issues, we launched our Texas Technology for All petition. And even though we're headquarters in Austin, when we think about having internet access, this is definitely an issue that I believe everyone should be focusing on, not just Austin, not just Texas, but we really wanted to push for the issue of stating that, hey, if we're looking to be, a smart city here in Austin, if we're looking to become a leading state as far as Texas is concerned, well, then we really need to be rethinking about what does access to technology even mean, or how are we preventing individuals from getting ahead because of their current environment. So our Texas Technology for All petition has 3 parts. One is demanding Governor Abbott to provide an increase in internet access for those that are low income, underrepresented, but also providing them with technology devices as well. Because what's good is the internet if you don't have a device, and what good is a device if you don't have the internet? Both of those go hand in hand. But the other piece of our petition is saying, okay, once you provide individuals internet access and we give them access to technology, the next phase of that is actually upskilling and reskilling our population to transition to the tech industry. Because if we would have done this, let's say 5 years ago, or even last year, well, a lot of individuals would not have been as impacted by COVID-19 because they would have been more accustomed to the tech industry, and they would have packed up their computers and then just went home. A lot of my colleagues in the tech space, that's all they did. Their students already had devices. Their students already had, or their children, I should say, already had devices, already had access to the internet. So for those individuals and those families, they weren't as impacted by COVID or by the city/state closing down, but other individuals were. So the whole point of this petition is to demand Governor Abbott to do those 3 things, but also provide a seat at the table for us to lead these conversations, because I don't know the gentleman that was speaking, but he said you're either on the table or you're on the menu. And we've seen that so many times here in Austin, but also just across Texas, where we have certain individuals leading and directing policies and practices and initiatives, but there's a huge disconnect between the actual end user. And I bring that up because these issues haven't been here, since just this year, right? These issues have always been here for years. So I'm really looking to change the conversation, get more visibility around these issues, which is why we have a petition right now, and demand change, because I don't want things to go back. Because going back to COVID means there's have and have nots. I'm looking to continue to reimagine not just education, but reimagine workforce development and what that really means for opportunities in technology, because we have a huge skills gap. And in order for us to actually solve that skills gap, we need to be teaching not just the younger generation, but we need to be teaching the entire generations around technology and what that really means.
Michael, thank you very much. That's really a ton of really great information that we really appreciate. You know, I think back to the conversations that we've had over the last couple of months with people like Vince Cerf and Dr. Yang Zhao, and what they kept saying that really resonated with a lot of folks is, if we just solve the COVID problem, then we're fine. We're no worse off, but we have an opportunity now to really address gaps that have been ignored for decades. And this can be our rallying point to do that. Michael, before we move on from you really quick, Ebony Mitchell is asking in the chat if you wouldn't mind sharing your change.org petition link. I'm sure folks, if they live in Texas, would love to sign it. And if they don't, would love to see the progress as it goes and see what they can learn from that. So thank you very much for sharing. We appreciate it. I think that Ohio's in sort of a weird situation where Ohio is not one of these states. But as a state, Ohio decided to still kind of follow this process and use this as an opportunity, using internal funding to really make some big change. And I'm sure you'll all be insanely shocked to hear that Jan is deeply involved in that and has her fingers wrapped around all of that. So I'd like to hear from Jan about what is happening in Ohio and how that impacts what we're doing and thinking. Della, were you going to jump in on something? I see your hand up. Okay, no. Sorry. So it's okay. Before Jan starts, two quick things. The first is that Veronica posted that link that Jan was trying to share in the chat. So you should be able to go ahead and click on that. And also, as we're starting to come to the end of our time, if you have any specific questions, we want to make sure that we're discussing things that will help you have the biggest impact possible. So make sure to put those in that Q&A tool so we can try to get to those. While we're waiting for that, Jan, what's happening in Ohio?
So let me tell you that when this solicitation came out, the Ohio's Department of Education decided that the design team that they were going to put together was going to be the STEM team they used to create all the ecosystems in the state, as well as the STEM schools. So it was like putting the band together. We hadn't been together in 10 years, really, as a group designing together, but certainly as a state functioning together. So that was number one. So from the beginning, STEM was the perspective that we all came with, was equity, was STEM, was because we had worked very hard together as a unit. And the state felt, including the governor and lieutenant governor, that if it worked once, that the design team would work again. And what Ohio then decided, they knew that we didn't have enough COVID numbers to get the funds, but they took $15 million out of other money, and they're launching their entire proposal that was designed. And what Ohio for that $15 million is going to do is a 5-point plan. They're launching something called Remote edX, an organized marketplace that connects educators, schools to innovative field-initiated student learning and remote education exemplars, and integrates concepts and transforms remote education offering. In other words, if you're a nonprofit, if you've got evidence to show that remote learning or whatever you're doing in learning and education in the state has the ability to have that broadest definition of remote, you're in on the marketplace. And what that then they were able to do is establish a remote edX network and a coordinating council. Everybody in the state who had come together to design this, the state decided they didn't want to disband. And grew it a little bit into this coordinating council, have created what's called the support squad. Who's the support squad? Who's going to make all this happen for schools? How's this going to happen for the education service centers? The support squad facilitates model selection, assists in all the interfaces. So they're doing air traffic control, and it's called a support squad. The other thing is there's something called connectivity crusaders. How do you meet the needs of internet? In Ohio, we have 42% of the state is not connected with students on the internet. So how's that going to change? And this internet, these connectivity crusaders are the business and industry. They are the policy makers. So that was the other piece of this. So it was all around the idea that partners and families have to be together to make this work for the state, and that's what they've been after to begin with. So the out of school environment is strong. So it is different. And everybody's geared up and ready to go for these flow of funds to get this happening and actually make it to the districts.
Thank you, Jan. Michael's asking if there's a link somewhere to Ohio's plan. Is that out there yet, invisible?
You're going to be able to see Ohio's proposal on the link that I've got up right now, because that's not the link of winners. That's the link of all the proposals.
Perfect.
Okay, and I'm happy to send everything out. Ohio is not keeping anything proprietary and has created the marketplace and is starting to really work on the other pieces.
Perfect. So here's where we are. We've got about 15 minutes left. We don't have specific questions. Frankly, I think I'm putting myself in the shoes of the folks who are on this call, and this is big and overwhelming. I don't even know that people know what to ask necessarily as they're kind of thinking through this. So what I'm wondering is, and unless other questions come in, if maybe it might be valuable for everybody to, for the four of you, Jan, Jeff, Della, and Veronica, to maybe go kind of around and put yourself in the shoes of an ecosystem leader who doesn't necessarily have deep connections yet, who sees these proposals. If it were you, if you were in that position, what would your next 3 or 5 days look like? What would you be focusing on first to make sure that you've got a great plan? Jan, can we start with you?
Sure. I would say I would go back to the fact that you've got to get to the State Department of Education and to your best friends at the state level, whoever can get you to the committee that's actually in planning this. And I would do more than tap them on the shoulder. I would make the case, if you haven't already, that you have already the infrastructure for helping and supporting not only the implementation of this, but actually the actual creation of the design that's going to be sustainable.
Perfect. Thank you, Jan. Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of goes back to our ongoing message of listen. It involves reaching out first, but it's really kind of hearing what that is. Della, what about you? If you were in this position, you were starting to take off and try to make change, what would your next steps be?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, Jan's counsel is sound. I mean, you need to figure out who in your state is working on this and might have some sway in how the funds are spent. But I think if you and others who have been on the line have heard me talk about this stuff in the past, I beat folks over the head with the message that the time to make friends is before you need them. And if you don't know who those folks are that are making decisions about this pot of money, find out who they are and then really be deliberate about maintaining these relationships so that you're not knocking on the door as an unknown entity when there's money to be spread around. Like, you're a trusted partner to these folks through thick and thin. And I think that advocacy is something that needs to be taken on deliberately, consistently over time. And so I think for those of you who are connected to those offices, you'll probably have an easier time navigating this opportunity. And for those who are not connected to these folks, I think now's the time to start figuring out who the relationships are that you want to have the next time there's an opportunity like this.
Della, I think a good example of that, and Jan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is right, is that part of how Jan is so involved in this new plan is back when the proposals came out and Ohio didn't get it, Jan said to those folks, well, great, so there's no money. We're still in this with you. We still want to help you. We still want to make change. So then when the money came, they're a lot more likely to say, well, this is somebody who knows what they're doing and also is willing to do it no matter what. So let's bring them on board. So I think that's a really important message.
Yeah.
Veronica, what about from an ecosystem perspective? Like specifically as an ecosystem, what have you seen and what should people be thinking about? You are muted. Stand by.
Hold on.
You are unmuted.
I should not be. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I thought I unmuted myself. Well, I was saying that Jan and Della both stole my points. So I think one of the, if we think about sort of the 5 main strengths of an ecosystem, the cross-sector partnerships is really one of the fundamental pillars. And so as both Jan and Della mentioned, building those partnerships and having that structure as an ecosystem is fundamental, because then you have those friends there when you need, before you need them. I think just to add, so that I'm not reiterating what they said, in trying to build those relationships now in sort of a sticky situation where everybody is kind of scrambling, people are kind of trying to figure out, you know, how to best, you know, survive their own, have their own organization survive, also to best provide solutions for communities. I think one thing in building partnerships, especially in a very chaotic time, it would be thinking about what your needs are, but what your expertise is and what you can offer. So as you're trying to build friends, when you needed them already, making sure that you're not asking to take, that you're also able to provide things. And one of our ecosystem leaders in Pittsburgh, LaTrenda, Cheryl, shout her out, she mentioned that in this time, because there is so much going on, it's really important to do what you do best, and to think about what your organization does best, think about what your ecosystem does best, and try to offer that as part of the solution as the plan and the proposal is being built. Additionally, as we continue to think about equity, not just for connectivity, but thinking about racial equity, thinking about equity for families that may have been marginalized throughout the whole process. As an ecosystem, really think about what who your partners are and what your expertise is there, and how you can bring that and elevate that as part of the conversation, because you likely have a lot of the same players at the table. And I think bringing solutions that are different and offering equitable solutions to folks that might have been marginalized will solve challenges that your state has likely had for a while. So thinking about those two things, I definitely would add that.
Thank you, Veronica. You know, I think it's important for everybody to remember those words that we say maybe too much in this world, design. There's a lot more that you could possibly advocate for than you possibly have funds and person hours to actually do. So it's probably a worthwhile exercise as you're thinking through all the things that Veronica just said, to bring your team together and really design a very specific advocacy plan. What are our goals? Which areas are we focusing on? And drive that home as you continue. Jeff, could you bring us home? What would you do? You're doing it, and you helped design the things it's based on. So what are so we just want to copy you, Jeff. So what should we all be copying from what you're doing?
That's funny, because I want to copy you. Okay. You know, what's interesting is all of us have been on the drafting side of a proposal, and we know well that emotion that people are feeling right now. It's news that they got the grant. Oh boy, followed by, uh-oh. Now we got to do what we proposed. Oh my gosh, who do we know? So the soil is perfect for planting the STEM ecosystem seed as people are still panic stricken and wondering who's going to do what. And then to echo Veronica and others already, okay, step 2 is to generate a specific array of solutions and strategies and tools that the STEM ecosystem can bring to the table, whether it is developing content or reviewing curriculum or producing and uploading PD or matching mentors and connecting communities, whatever it might be. I can foresee that we're going to draft something of a white paper here shortly and shoot it up to the governor's office and say, here's what we can do for the panic-stricken authors of this grant. We're here to help and save and augment your efforts. And the last thing I would say is it's so unique. We're all finding state to state who the power brokers are and which buttons to push. And if your states are anything like ours, the business community really has the governor's ear. And of course, the governor will determine who helps the Department of Ed. And so if your STEM ecosystem involves CEOs of companies and they have a direct line to the governor's office, they can create that conduit for you. We find that the business leaders of the state and state legislators are some of the phone calls we would make in trying to break in to the, maybe if it's some inner circle of developers of the proposals. So for what it's worth.
Great.
Jeff, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Jan, close us out. As you know, STEM is a massive, massive topic, collection of topics. Where do we focus, and bring us home?
So thank you, Jeremy, and thank you to everybody for this. It's just the beginning of a conversation and a little nugget to get this started. But let me add a couple of things that weren't touched just real quickly. I want to talk about flow of federal funds within the state. It is all bidded out. This is not money that can be assigned. A little bit can be granted, but very small, and to nonprofits. Most of it will have to go in a bid. That's something that your education agencies, local and regional, and your schools are very familiar with. You should be very familiar with that process from your ecosystem perspective and with all your good connections with those folks themselves. Very, very important. The other thing is that the strength of us on the call here today, and as Jeff said so eloquently, is the community of practice. Doing a grant like this and executing on it is going to teach everybody, the state, the local, the ecosystems, what's best and how to do this, and what it means to be innovative. This is all words right now on pieces of paper. When they are actually happening, the system in the state will impact your system because you're part of that. So as we learn from each other, we should share. This is a perfect practice group to keep in mind, because as we all together, the 11 states, know more, then we can help as the federal money flows throughout the next years, which is something else I want to mention. Funds in the next couple of years, the private sector is going to be harder and harder to access funds that are actually flowing in ways that are most accessible to ecosystems. If that's the case, then creativity and smarts about connection to the real world work that makes a difference for our children, for our communities, is going to be public as well as private. Good to understand what it means when NSF puts out of solicitation, or a Department of Education, or even the Department of Energy, but even better to know how to help each other. And so I would hope, Veronica, and maybe and Alyssa and all of us together, that we might form a separate practice group that would do that would actually support this, because there will be Department of Labor grants, and there's more and more coming, as Della always helps us to understand. And the more we can act like a community of practice, the better off we're all going to be, as well as our families within our own states and across the states. So everybody on the call, thank you so much. We appreciate everything that you're doing, and we are always hopeful for what we can do together. We need you to stay safe, stay healthy, and remember, the E in STEM teaches us to solve problems. Go out and help everybody understand how to solve those problems. Engineering design is it. So STEM is not irrelevant, and it's not siloed. It is what will get us out of the mess we're all in. Thanks again. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, Jan. This has been the latest in the ongoing community conversation sponsored by TIES and the STEM Learning Ecosystems Community of Practice, and focused on the Rethinking Education Grant. This session offered a space to brainstorm to help ensure that your ecosystems are relevant to the design efforts happening in your state. Thank all of you for joining this webinar today, and please keep the conversation going. We'll be sending a summary of today's webinar to all of you, and we're also available to engage in one-on-one conversations. Thank you, Jan, Veronica, Della, and Jeff, and good luck all of you in your efforts. We're excited to see your ecosystems make real change in your state.